Oh, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I appreciate it, and we are getting started a little bit late here. So I think everybody likely knows Commissioner Hilary Franz is the Public Lands Commissioner for the Department of Natural Resources, and we're really happy to have her on this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. We have been working on a lot of different projects, and so we are excited to have her join us and hear about what she envisions for Clallam County for the public land. So I will let Commissioner Franz take it from there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be with you all. I'd love to actually be there in person. It's hard to get a sense of who all is in the room when you only have 6 photos at a time here. But I see some familiar faces and then I see some new faces. Did not know how, some of you know DNR like the back of your hand. Hello, Rod. It's good to see you. And some others of you may not know all that DNR does, as well as sort of diving in the deep parts of our job. So I thought I'd first just do an overview and then sort of talk about what's top of mind and front and center priority, besides the fact just getting through COVID and hoping we're almost on the tail end, which I know many of you are probably hoping for as well. For those who are not familiar, Department of Natural Resources, which I oversee, is basically 6 agencies. One, we oversee 2.6 million acres of aquatic land. Much of that aquatic land is around your jurisdiction, but it's our oceans, our Puget Sound, our rivers, lakes, and streams. And in our management of our aquatic lands, we have a proprietary role where we own the bedlands and we lease them out for shellfish. We're actually the largest gooey duck producer in North America. China's #1 aphrodisiac, got hit hard by tariffs and COVID, but we're hoping to be bouncing back as our economy is getting back up and running. We have leases with ports, marinas, as well as dock owners. And the money that we generate from those leases goes directly towards salmon habitat restoration and protection and increasing access to our public waterways. I also oversee 3 million acres of uplands. So these are all the lands that are above water, and I don't mean financially, I mean literally above water. 2 million acres of forest land, much of it in your backyard. 1 million acres of agricultural land. We're actually the largest wheat producer in the state, and my hope is we're going to become the largest vineyard and orchard producer as well. And then we have a pretty significant commercial industrial portfolio, everything from Costco, Safeways, Fred Meyer's, the Edgewater Hotel is part of our land portfolio. And in that we generate around 325 million a biennium, 125 million for your schools, K through 12, community colleges and university, and 200 million for our counties. Many of the counties that most depend on those resources are counties like yours that are more rural, that have less of a diverse tax base. And we know that many of those communities are struggling even more now with COVID than they were before. I also oversee the 2nd largest amount of recreation land in the state. I have one regulatory role, and that is to regulate the timber industry, everything from the large timber landowners like the Weyerhaeusers and Sierra Pacifics to the small family landowners like my own family and myself. I then also oversee Washington State's wildfire, something we'll definitely talk about as we know that it is becoming more and more significant year after year. And if that wasn't enough, I oversee Washington State geology. So think everything that happens underneath the surface of the earth. It is a very volatile environment politically above the earth. It is the surface of the earth. It is very volatile geologically under the surface of the earth here in Washington State with 5 live volcanoes, the threat of a big earthquake, tsunamis, and we do a lot of the data and information and then education and awareness building in that area. Obviously, we are seeing significant challenges throughout our state environmentally as we see increasing catastrophic wildfires. I'm going to first start with that and then dive into the other issues and focus areas. We have seen increasing growth in catastrophic wildfires. In fact, 5 out of the last 6 years have been catastrophic fire seasons, starting with 2015, where 1 million acres burned. 2018, we had 440,000 acres burned. And then last year, 2020, we had over 820,000 acres burned, 600,000 of those acres burned in literally 72 hours in the Labor Day firestorms. We're seeing increasing fires on the west side of our state, something that for those who grew up in the Northwest, like myself, may be surprising. But 2 out of the last 3 years, 40% of our fires have been west of the Cascades. When you look at this year's drought map, it is one that should be troubling and concerning all of us. Not only is most all of Eastern Washington in drought condition, but we're seeing the Southwest and the coast having significant drought concerns, and we're just starting in June. And April is already presenting us with the reality that this year is probably going to be even worse than last year. We had 225 fires in the month of April alone, compared to last year where we had 160 fires in April, and compared to the 10-year average where we had 53 fires in the month of April. Our seasons are getting longer. The areas that we are covering are getting larger. And this is something that I have been saying for a long time is only going to get worse if we don't start addressing the larger issue. One is investing in wildfire response. We have underinvested in the wildfire resources that we need in Washington state. We have, when I came into this role, we had 7 helicopters to fight our fires. They all fought in the Vietnam War. They all have the bullet holes to show for it. We've been able to expand that to now 11 helicopters, but 10 of those fought in the Vietnam War. We are the largest wildfire fighting agency in the state, and we have only 60 firefighters. And last year we found ourselves completely outmanned on the ground and out-resourced in the air, where we had skeleton crews on the ground. Many of them we should have been having more than, we had about a type 2 is the best we could get incident management team on some of the most tragic and catastrophic fires. That's about a 15-member crew leading that fire. It should have been easily, I'm sorry, it's a type 3. It should have been easily a type 2 or type 1, 50 to 75. And I could have said that on over most of the 53 fires that started on Labor Day alone. The fact is, every single fire season, we find ourselves, because we're later in the year than the Californias and the Oregons and Colorados, we find ours at sort of the end of the wait list to get the air resources and firefighters we need that we've relied on from the federal government and through mutual aid with other states. Fortunate, in addition to that, we know that why we're seeing more catastrophic wildfires is we have a forest health crisis. In Eastern Washington alone, we have 2.7 million acres of forest that are dead and dying. This is a problem that has been occurring for over 50 to 100 plus years. And we have to truly be proactive here and get on the forest and remove the dead, dying, disease trees, remove the smaller diameter, get more space between those trees. And the truth is it's not just in Eastern Washington. Reason we're seeing more increasing fires on the west side of the state is we have a similar challenge. We developed a forest health plan, a 20-year forest health plan for Eastern Washington. We have made rapid improvement in restoring the health of those forests, treating over 250,000 acres in the last 3 years, compared to 2005 to 2012, where we treated 30,000 acres in 7 years. But we're still not going fast enough. We've been pushing for the legislature to invest in wildfire response, forest restoration, and community resilience. And fortunately, this year, after a lot of hard work, and a lot of investment by many stakeholders throughout the state and our agency, we were able to pass House Bill 1168, which will significantly invest in 3 key areas to change the trajectory we're on, as I say, to prevent the evergreen state turning charcoal black. The first is wildfire response, investing in the firefighters we need on the ground, the equipment we need on the ground, and the air resources. We know that our local fire districts who are first on the line are facing more and more challenges in fighting these fires, especially when our agency is having to fight many fires across the state. This funding will now help generate $500 million over the next 8 years and drive resources down to the local level, helping increase the number of volunteer firefighters and full-time firefighters at the local level, increase the level of equipment and also the level of training. In addition, it'll enable us to hire 100 firefighters that when they are not fighting those fires, they will be doing forest health treatments so that we can actually get at the reason we're seeing more catastrophic fires. We'll also be able to increase our air resources so that we continue to be able to get on those fires quickly and get them contained and put them out before the next one. And third significant bucket of 1168 was community resilience. After seeing the tragedy of Malden, the small town where in just 2 to 3 hours, 80% of that town was completely burned to the ground. All that stood was rubble, foundation, and chimney. That community is going to take a long time to rebuild. It was obvious, though, as I walked the streets, how homes on postage stamp lots that were completely destroyed amongst that rubble was a home not even touched. Fire just moved around it. Block after block had a similar case. And the reality is people can be doing and taking steps to make their homes more resilient to those fires. Small forest landowners can take steps to restore the health of their forest to prevent their homes from burning down. And in addition to that, communities can be building fuel breaks to help stop those fires from even coming to the doorstep. We built in 1168 funding over the next 8 years for those 3 key buckets, including working on a forest health plan for Western Washington, as we are seeing the dying off of forests up and down our coast, also in the interior within Whatcom and Skagit and Snohomish and Lewis and Clark County, all the way out to your community where year after year, you guys are seeing fires in your community. A key piece also is workforce development. We recognize that as we are going out and hiring people within natural resources, in forestry, in fire science, along with our private sector colleagues, that we are finding we're coming up short with a gap in well-trained, qualified people. At the same time, we have a significant gap, an unemployment gap that was only exacerbated by COVID. And so we have written into 1168 a workforce development where we will work with Department of Commerce, with local community organizations like yourself, and with OSPI to develop not only a program for growing the talent we need within natural resources within our K through 12 and community and technical colleges and university, but also training those people who are unemployed or underemployed to be able to do this work. We're looking for help and assistance with the development of this program, and obviously would love to have your engagement as we design and develop that with our agency partners, Department of Commerce and OSPI. So that's wildfire and forest health. We are headed into that season right now. It is all consuming, as you can imagine, as we get our firefighters trained and we get them deployed out on the ground. And as we're already fighting fires, over 400 at this point, and it's only first part of June. Other key priorities right now is our uplands, those 3 million acres that we manage. I was committed to, before I even took over in this role, to complete a trust land performance assessment to truly look at the 3 million acres of land that we manage. A very diverse portfolio, diverse in geography, diverse in its productivity and revenue generation, and diverse in its type. Key was to truly understand what are the lands we have currently within our portfolio, how are they performing, how is the world around them changed, meaning what are the infrastructure investments in that community that were once there or that are there here today that would help us to generate more revenue from those lands, as well as partnering with local communities and organizations like yourself to help increase investments that would help us to generate even more money. The Trustline Performance Assessment was completed last year, and now we are in the process of developing a plan, a strategy for us to be able to optimize the portfolio we have, to look at those lands that are underperforming, that may not be best to be within our portfolio, and to be making key investments so that we can be generating more revenue. I'm pleased to say that in House Bill 1168, I worked and we added an additional language in there as to our forest lands that will have us updating our inventory, making sure that our forest inventory we have is as accurate as it can be, helping ensure that our growth and yield modeling is also accurate and improving upon the modeling we currently do. The goal is to inform us of what we have and ensure that we are providing reliable numbers. We developed a sustainable harvest calculation technical advisory committee. We're currently right now going out and adding people to that have very technical experience in the area of growth and yield modeling and in inventory, so that we can use them as a set of advisors to help us as we do our sustainable harvest calculation that is coming up and due in the next few years. In addition to that, we have been investing in our agricultural lands, increasing production on land that used to be generating either little to no money. Examples of that are Lake Patterson, where property where we had several thousand acres of land, 3,000 acres of land that we generate about $1.43 an acre on that land. We've secured a significant investment in the water resources on that land, which will now enable us to turn that into $20 to $30 million over the next 50 years, even more than that, in high value crop. The similar is true in the context of Red Mountain and Candy Mountain in the Tri-Cities, where we have now planted thousands of acres of land there in production for grapes, generating where we were generating before 2017, $0 an acre, and we're now getting about $1,100 an acre. That land, what's great about it is not only are we generating more revenue for our schools, but we are also now able to grow and expand that local economy there that prior to 2016 was not necessarily known as the wine country of Washington State, and is rapidly becoming that, and is truly a new economic industry for that community. In addition to that, we are focused significantly on our commercial properties. We have land like right in Seattle, right next to the Pike Place Market, that generates about $150,000 a year in a parking lot. It should be a 25 to 40-story building, generating year after year returns in leases, commercial residential leases, while also helping the local economy there. Similar properties are up and down the I-5 corridor, whether it's residential zone, commercial zone, or industrial. Unfortunately, for too long, our commercial portfolio was one that was ignored and therefore not leveraged for our schools and funding the basic needs our kids have, and not leveraged to be able to fund our county, as well as the fact of growing our local economies and helping be part of the economic development in that region. We are also rapidly expanding renewable energy, moving from about $1.43 an acre to $1,100 to $1,400 an acre in wind and solar, and expanding that portfolio and making those lands more available so we can year on year expand the returns we're making for our schools. The last piece I'll go, because I can see a lot of people have questions, and is actual rural economic development. I know this is an area that you all have been focused on for a very, very long time. You know your community, you know the opportunities. We have many counties throughout the state that we are turning to, wanting to help and provide support, resources, and partnership to help not only generate more revenue from the lands we manage, but also be a partner in growing your economies in those communities, diversifying those economies as well. And specifically, it means being intentional about the lands that we have available and about partnering with the private sector and local governments for critical infrastructure investments. Examples like in Porterville, Waco, where we helped secure funding for a recycling vessel facility that takes the derelict boats that we spend millions and millions of dollars a year removing from our waterways, which right now just costs us money. And through an investment there's now a recycling facility that takes those boats out of the water, takes them apart piece by piece, sells them on the internet. We then are not only creating 25 less jobs in that community, but we're also being able to help ensure that our waterways stay clean. We're hoping to expand that program because it has been very, very successful. Forest Health, I think, is another key example where when we made a commitment to restore 1.25 million acres of forest in Eastern Washington alone, and now our goal focusing on West Side, we sent a message to the marketplace. If you're interested in taking smaller diameter wood, taking dead, dying, diseased wood and turning into product, you should invest in Washington State. We've been working with Vaughan Timbers that set up a facility within a year and a half of that plan being completed, and is now selling some of the greatest cross-laminate timber, not just in Washington State, but outside of Washington State. We're having similar conversations in the area of biomass as we find ourselves with significant amount of slash piles after each one of these forest health treatments, and just in our regular timber work. We've been talking with businesses that are wanting to come to Washington State and set up biomass facilities that turn them into pellets, or even frankly, aviation fuel, as we now see Alaska Airlines and other airlines moving to a different type of fuel source. We have other examples within the context of broadband. We're expanding our cell tower, communication tower work. As we know, more and more people are working from home, and many of our communities, some of the things holding it back from their economic development is simple access to the internet, which has become even more of a critical piece. We obviously have land in all 39 counties and the ability to build on those lands, communication infrastructure. We already have 10 sites like that, and we're seeing even more pressing demand with COVID. Work in the legislature this last year will help us actually expand that portfolio and be more available in communities to provide those basic resources. I could keep going. Some of you probably have already heard all that I just shared. You can see there is not a slow day at the office. We are working tirelessly to be able to improve the way we manage our lands, to understand the resources we have, and to be a better partner with our local governments, our local communities, and our businesses throughout the state. Your organization is one of the key ones we want to be working with, and I look forward to the conversation today and then just continuing to work together in the years to come.
Okay, thank you so much, Commissioner Franz. So I put in the chat there, I should have done it first off, that if you have a question, you can either put your name in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand. And as I know, the Prince of Peace, Rod Fleck from the beautiful land of Forks, knows Commissioner Franz well. I will let you ask the question.
Well, good morning, Commissioner and Colleen. I really appreciate the time. Apparently, I didn't change my name placard from the Senate Assembly, but I really wanted to say thank you, Commissioner, for not only being here, but for embracing technology, allowing for more engagement with the department. I think it's worked out very, very well in that regard. As you know, there have been a couple of proposals by advocates that could best be described as wanting the DNR to set aside big, tall stands of trees, with some of those stands being 55 years of age or so, or systematically divest the DNR of more of its timber holdings. And what are your thoughts on those proposals?
I mean, Rod, just so we're clear, we're talking about the old growth policy and the issue, correct? I want to make sure I got your whole question, right? And
well,
the question,
it's more, Commissioner, of the proposal that came in to just start if they're big, tall trees, or it's the Goldman and Belcher proposals. You had two that kind of hit you both a couple months ago.
Yeah. So first, I mean, for those who haven't seen, the Goldmark Belcher proposal is that we would take our forested land, the 2 million acres of forest land, and set aside 5% every year for 20 years in an ecological reserve, so that all of our forests are set aside under an ecological reserve status. I have been very outspoken that I believe that this is not the best for our environment. It's also not the best for our communities. I think the most sustainable thing we can be doing is actually growing our wood here in Washington State. We grow some of the finest wood in Washington State. And the fact is the one thing I've now learned is where everybody lives, how many books they're reading and how their homes and businesses are structured. And wood is everywhere. And we know wood is the most sustainable building product there is. If we are now exporting the production of our wood, we are now increasing transportation costs. We are also increasing the greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. In addition, us growing our trees here help support and ensure that our private landowners also stay in production. In many cases, we represent 50% of production in mills, many of the mills in Washington State. If that production was to go away, those mills would shut down. That would significantly impact our private small forest landowners and large forest landowners. It would also lead to the problem we're seeing in central Washington, where there is no mill in place. And we have some of the worst forest health conditions on federal lands, private lands, and state lands, because it costs far too much in the transportation cost than you can get for the wood itself. I will continue to be asserting that we have already set aside 40% of our lands almost in conservation of the 2 million acres. We also have some of the most sustainable forest practices, where if we were getting our wood from outside states or other countries who have less, that is not necessarily environmental stewardship or wise environmentally. And so I will continue to stand for the fact that we should be not only maintaining the forest we have in production, but we should also be looking to increase that amount of land, as we're seeing the rapid conversion of small forest landowners in every corner of our state, especially with COVID and everybody wanting to move out into the woods. We need to do a better job of protecting the portfolio we have and keeping it in production and helping the economies and industries that depend on it and making sure people have affordable wood supply. But in addition to that, we should be actually expanding our forest land portfolio to protect those small forest landowners or keep those in forestry, but also to make sure that we continue to generate sustainable revenue for our local governments and our schools. As to the, Rod, to the question of older trees, like my joke sometimes is, I used to think 50 was old until I turned 50, and now I think I'm quite young, right? And so we all can say, how old is a tree? And what we have set, as you know very well, we have a very significant old growth policy that was adopted many years ago by some of the preeminent scientists. We are right now, there's been question about whether that policy is correct or not. We are educating the board about what that policy is. As you know, we have a lot of new board members who were not here during the time of development of that policy. And so we're using this moment to inform about what the policy is. Is there anything of issue with that policy that needs to be improved, or is that policy accurate and good enough? And so that question is happening as we speak, frankly, in front of the board.
Great. Thank you very much. So next.
Can I say something, Colleen, to Commissioner Franz in regards to that policy? Yeah, just anyway, I've been in the industry for 34 years, and just to give you a little input on the old growth scenario is all new modern sawmills are not able to take any old growth. And I would say in the entire industry, we're probably down to 5 to 10% of all volume consumed are mills that can take old growth. In other words, nobody in the 90 percentile can take anything bigger than 30-inch in diameter. So it sounds like you already know that. And
Yeah.
obviously, I would recommend that there's some aggressive plans on all the logs that are 29 inches tall, wide, I mean.
Oh, we're now going, now we know
and not harvestable.
right? 29 inches. Okay, now we got a whole new set of parameters.
Yeah. Okay.
It's no
Anyway,
longer about age, it's about height, right? Yeah, I know Rod knows that too. But yes,
Yeah.
I hear you. I'm very well aware. I mean, we have two sort of general kinds of mills. We have the ones that are largely taking the smaller diameter, as you mentioned, and then we have the ones that are taking more of DNR's, age trees, right? Or size trees. We need both types of mills, and we are key and critical in helping support both.
Thank you. So next, Commissioner Beauvais, if you'll go ahead and ask your question. And when you ask your question, everyone, please state your name and who you work with. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner. This is Commissioner Connie Beauvais with Port Angeles. It is great to see you this morning. Even though you're far away, it's still wonderful to see you. And I know you're a very busy person, so thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us this morning. I'm going to read you my question, and then I'm going to ask another question because you and Rod kind of covered this, but if you want to add anything to it, that'd be great. So my question was, DNR's Marble Murrelet Conservation Plan was supposed to release lands in question for management. We understand some organizations are pushing you and DNR to set aside these acres that were released as part of this compromised plan. Do you have anything else you'd like to share about this situation? And then I'm going to switch my question to the OESF in Clallam County and ask you to tell the audience just a little bit about what the OESF is and what kinds of projects in terms of science and in timber quantity is planned in the near future. Thank you.
Yeah, so, sorry. Okay, so, okay, two questions. This is what happens when you need a little more morning coffee and you get two questions in one. So let's break it up. So first one, Connie, the first question was specifically Marble Murrelet, and the question about there's people who are organizations that are trying to have more land set aside than what was agreed to under the Habitat Conservation Plan. I think it's important for people to first realize that we have currently a pretty significant lawsuit that has gone to the Washington State Supreme Court that is out of the Marble Murrelet, that is questioning what, the sort of the definition of public interest or that our lands that we manage on behalf of our counties and our schools, what that means and how it's defined. This is probably going to be the fact is Washington State Supreme Court chose to take direct review. I love how Rod, you just showed up when we start talking about legal cases, chose to take review. This is, I would say, a pretty significant moment, and people should be watching this case. We are obviously working with our beneficiaries to defend this case and the position that we took with the Habitat Conservation Plan, believing that we balanced our responsibility under the Endangered Species Act while also balancing our responsibility as fiduciaries to the trust. I think most of the conversations have really been around, are there opportunities on certain particular sales? As you know, you were at the solutions table. Those potential ideas were coming possibly to the legislature. We have obviously not been continuing those conversations and work. And right now we're focused on the litigation that is in front of us as top priority. Okay, your second question is on OESF. OESF has been around for a long time and was really trying to take a new approach. In that context of community engagement and stakeholder engagement and our management of the forest lands. I don't have with you, I didn't bring my timber sale, maybe Rod's got it though, for the next month, the next year. I don't have that in front of me. That question is a great question. I have Darwin on here. We can grab it and send you the information we have on that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just let her know that they're on target to meet their OESF harvest schedule. At least that was the last quarterly 2
Yes.
months ago.
Well, if that was your question, that's an easy question. I thought you wanted full numbers going out for the next 5 years. I don't have that number in front of me.
Well, of course, we'd like that, Commissioner, but I mean,
I know we're on target there, and and for those who have questions, I think Rod would say we're trying to improve our presentations and get even more information out to be informing the public at our board meetings, and so please feel free to attend. Rod, I think sometimes feels lonely.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Franz. Next, Brian, if you'll introduce yourself, and then Commissioner Randy Johnson.
Morning, I'm Brian Carnes with Port Angeles Hardwood, and I just kind of wanted to come on and thank Hilary for the specialty wood product pilot program that they put together that's going after alder and cedar harvest and that on the peninsula. This I know Sig will say too, it's a big deal for our industry to have this program and have it succeed, to bring us more products for our mill, to keep our mill running full time, which is a struggle on the peninsula with the limited harvest that we've had in the past. A couple questions I guess I would have on that, and I don't know if everybody knows what the program is or not. But I guess the first question I had was, have you guys hired the person for this position yet? And then secondly is, who is going to be overseeing this pilot position so that we can help as much as we can on our end to help it succeed?
Yeah, so I don't have exactly where we are in the hiring process on that particular person. I mean, we're hiring 100 people, and I'm not on top of all of those. I do know that things were a bit slowed down just with COVID. We had to first do a hiring freeze. We had to do furloughs. It was part of the state order that came from OFM, and we were implementing that. And now we're opening up positions that we had on hold. I can have Darwin get back to you specifically on that particular position. Obviously, that person is going to report to Angus, who's head of Uplands, who directly reports to my COO and me. My statement to you is we take very seriously working to make sure that we're doing the best in getting more of our hardwood and resources out, giving more reliability to you. And so just know it's of utmost importance to us. And I think that was demonstrated by the work we've done in short sales and other areas regarding hardwoods.
Thank you.
Great. So in that pilot program also targeted cedar residuals, and I worked with PA Hardwoods and also Northwest Forest Products and Senator Vandewey and Representative Chapman and the ports. So we were really excited to have that pilot program initiated because several of our local mills didn't have the supply they needed. And there was a big concern that they might have to shut down just based on the process DNR followed, not any other issues. So we're really excited and hopeful that that will be able to provide the supply needed to several mills in the Olympic region.
Yeah, and we're currently, just so you know, I mean, what we're doing is we are in the final stages of the full sort of determination of the job duties, the scope of the position, right? So that is literally, if it's not been announced, it's on the heels of being announced, right? And then we need your help, guys, to help fill it with top talent, right? But that will help specifically in your areas,
You've got at least 2 people on today that will be buying those products, probably more. And, they'd love to talk to the folks that are designing that job description and to help out and give their perspective on things.
Okay, do you want to I want to make sure that this is followed up because, I go into a suite of meetings all day, but Darwin's on here. Can you make sure, Colleen, to follow up with
Yes.
Who would like to be connect them with Darwin, and then we can make sure that their input is being provided on the job description and scope.
Okay, so both Brian and Sig, if you'll in the chat connect with Darwin and put your email in there for him to know that, and anyone else. So, Commissioner Johnson.
Yes, thank you. And Commissioner Franz, thank you for meeting with all of us, even though in this method. My question deals with the Trust Lands Performance Assessment that you talked about briefly, which was over 300 pages by Deloitte with, I can't remember, 19 or 20 major recommendations. And I also sit on the Wasatch Timber Caucus, where we're working through all of our recommendations and priorities. But I would certainly like to hear from you very much what your priorities when you looked at it. I know your staff is working through that, but I've never directly heard from you about what you thought about the whole study and priorities, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and I'm sorry. I mean, I think about half of my presentation was on the trust land performance. And the key things we are now focused on that came out of that. I ran on getting a trust land performance assessment done because I believed the one from 20 years ago was extremely outdated. The world's changed dramatically. I mean, even with COVID now, it's changed dramatically about where people live, where they work, what are the economic opportunities we have. And so specifically, as I said, so on the forest land, I'll just make sure, on forest land, a key part is recognizing, and that's the language that I wrote for 1168, that specifically calls out the importance of our inventory and knowing exactly what we have on the landscape, being able to ensure that our growth and yield modeling is accurate and reliable, and continuing to prove that and test it. As you know, it's not a one and done work. 1168 now provides the funding for us to really do that robust work that's needed. And the creation of the Sustainable Harvest Calculation Technical Advisory Committee will help steward and make sure it's done right, but then make sure that we are keeping our inventory accurate and that our growth and yield modeling is performing and providing the information that we need. On the agricultural lands, I spoke specifically to the fact that we have, 75% of our agricultural land is either low performing or not performing. And we have an opportunity in many areas to be putting critical investments in for infrastructure that allows us to secure the water rights we have on that land or secure additional water rights to move them to higher value crops. I used examples of that with the Red Mountain. I also used examples with Patterson. Commercial, I think commercial and residential and industrial lands are some of the lands that nobody's been paying attention to, that we are literally leaving money on the table. We're leaving it on the street, and not just money for our beneficiaries, but actually money for our local communities that depend on economic development, one from industrial to commercial to even residential, as we see increasing housing crisis throughout our state. So obviously with the Trust Land Performance Assessment, it recognized those opportunities and how we had not leveraged them, things that I had already been aware of. But it also helped us identify what are the statutory barriers to us being able to do that. The similar with other investments in agriculture. And those, our goal will be bringing forward a suite of statutory changes that help sort of untie our hands to be able to do more investing on our own land. Something the private sector has the luxury of, but we don't. And so, I mean, I think that's where my goal is. We know what's possible with the lands we have. We need to have more ability to make critical investments in them. The same is true on our forest land when it comes to silviculture. I think the last piece to that I'll say is we know we have a checkerboard ownership, and it is not the most strategic or wise approach to land management and revenue generation. We've identified in the first step the number of lands that are low performing, that are not high value for us in our portfolio, that largely because they are in a checkerboard, and we're now selling those lands off. We will use those funds to go buy more strategic parcels. We've been buying strategic parcels in the area of forest land. They might be being sold by the Weyerhaeusers, the Sierra Pacifics, the Merrill Rings, purchasing them when it makes sense with our own existing portfolio. It'll also help us diversify sort of age classification and type to help on some of our sustainable calculation, dips. So happy for a larger conversation. For those who are interested in that issue, we are diving in deep on that in front of the Board of Natural Resources, really updating and engaging them. They may be already read the 400+ page document like I did, or maybe not, but really sort of diving in and developing now the strategy as to how we manage these lands now and into the future, and which lands should we have in our portfolio and which lands should we not.
Great, thank you. Next, Ray, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what was causing the trees to become ill. I mean, why are so many of the trees dead and dying, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, so there's lots of different, there's a number of things. First of all, you look back over 100 years and wildfire is natural in our forests. You could look at the central Puget Sound every year had, not every year, every 300 to 500 years had a 1 million acre fire. So fire is natural on our landscape in every single county of the state. What happened is over the last 50 to 100 years, we, and I say we, sort of the global, federal, state, local, was really on a process, and especially feds, of suppression of those fires. The moment fire started in the woods, it was get everything on those fires and put them out. The problem is that it didn't then remove the smaller diameter trees, the weaker trees, and it's created a very dense forest canopy that is not natural. What's natural is fire would come in and create more space and gaps between trees. It would take out the weak trees. It would take out the smaller diameter so that you didn't have so many trees competing for limited resources, limited soil nutrients, limited water resources, limited sunlight. And so now what we have besides that is we have hotter, drier temperatures. We have drought that's facing us year after year, which is making it even harder for our trees. Obviously, Eastern Washington has been struggling even longer than Western Washington, and why 2.7 million acres of forests are dying. About half of that is federal lands. The next big group is private landowners, and then there's state and tribal. My belief is we have the ability to change this trajectory. And through the work we've been doing, we've already done assessments on 2 million acres of forest land to really identify what is the condition of that forest and what does that forest need to look like to make sure that it is healthy and resilient to fire, because forests can naturally fight fires if they are healthy. In fact, when a fire comes through a forest, actually, if the fire is not so hot and volatile because it doesn't have so much fuel load on it, many of the trees there will survive that fire and actually grow healthier because of that fire. The landscape in Eastern Washington is different from Western Washington, and we will now be turning our attention to developing the plan for Western part of the state as we see increasing dying off and struggling forests. And then that plan will be being developed, and I know many of you will be engaging in it.
Great, thank you. So we have 8 more minutes, and it looks like at least 4 more questions, maybe 5. So next, Darlene Chanfeld, if you can ask your question, please.
Thank you. Yes. Hi, Hilary. You've got a balancing act here between using your lands and fiduciary responsibilities. You brought up 2 examples which forced me to ask this question. We have drought on throughout the Washington state, Eastern and Washington. But you you suggested using a parking lot in Seattle near Pikes Peak for a high rise. I don't know if that's for office or for homes, apartments, and also creating more crops and probably in Eastern Washington. Yet we have drought and we're going to have more drought. How are you going to balance trying to invest in these different manners that need water when we don't have it?
So my belief is that the number way we're going to actually be protecting sort of our environment and our natural resources, from our forests to our farmlands to our waterways, is by where we build, where we live, where we work. The more we are converting our forest lands and even our agricultural lands into housing developments, commercial developments, industrial developments, the more we are actually going to lose our ability to actually capture water, hold water, and store water. So I'm a believer that we should be putting our housing and commercial developments within our urban growth areas, and especially our dense urban growth areas like Seattle. It's an opportunity as we see increasing need for housing, also commercial development, economic development in communities, to make sure that we are putting our housing and commercial development on lands that are best appropriate and best situated, that will have the least amount of harm for the environment. On the area of, if we're to address drought, as we know, our climate is changing. And so we are seeing less water resources at certain times. The more we can be working to capture that water, our forests are our best capturing tool that we have. And we need to be doing everything possible to prevent our forests converting. One of the efforts that we're going to be focused on over the next 4 years is we see over 700,000 acres of forest have converted since 1973. And that number is only going to increase given COVID and the ability of people to, and ability and desire to work anywhere. We're seeing an unprecedented breaking off, selling off of our forest lands in Washington State, our private forest lands. And I believe if we're going to make sure that our forests are surviving and thriving, not just for our economy, but for our environment, we need to actually ensure that we maintain and retain those forests. And that will be significant for our capturing our water storage opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Joe Murray, and then Lena, and then Jim. Joe, please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to ask your question. I'm familiar with some of the clump planting research that's being done at the OESF. And in those cases, they're planting trees at high densities and wide spacings. And I'm curious if the purpose of that is to improve harvest and revenue, or improve habitat, or improve both, because those types of densities have a tendency to reduce growth because of the density. They limit height, and the wood is of poorer quality because it has more limbs. How do you see this research being used?
I apologize. The first part of your question about the research got cut out. I'm sorry. I didn't capture everything you just said. I apologize.
The OESF is doing research on clump planting.
Yeah.
That's where they plant trees in clumps at 4 foot by 4 foot spacing, and they have about 90 of them per acre. So even though you have a density of 360 trees per acre, they're growing at a density of 2,700 trees per acre, which is going to greatly limit growth. And I guess my question is this designed to improve revenue or improve habitat or both? Or how do you anticipate this research being used?
So I actually am not briefed specifically on this research, so I apologize. I think this is a great question, and what we should do is have Darwin sort of relay it back to one of our team members who's working on that. But I mean, most often the way we use our research is to understand sort of what is changing in the environment, right? Whether it's increasing hotter, drier temperatures, what are the management that we can do to continue to expand our ability to produce? And what does that mean from everything from the trees we're growing to the space we are providing for those trees? Jen Watkins and Derek Churchill are some of sort of the preeminent scientists we have at the agency leading this work. And so we can certainly get that information to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, let's see, Lena.
Thank you so much for being here. And I know you touched on the House Bill 1168, which congratulations on getting that passed. It sounds like it is a huge $130 million project. And you touched also on the wildfires, particularly here on the Olympic Peninsula. So my question is, do you have plans to work with our airports, communities, and other landowners to help bolster the forest health and wildfire resources on the Olympic Peninsula?
Yeah, so great question. So first of all, in this 1168 is 500 million over 8 years. A new part of this bill was the community resilience piece about providing the resources to our homeowners, to our small forest landowners, and to our communities to help make them more resilient. And specifically, we've already sort of launched the first pilot before the funding even came in, which is called Wildfire Ready Neighbors, where we're working with local fire districts, conservation districts, to sign people up to get an assessment on their property, whether they're a single family homeowner or a small forest landowner, to then have that assessment be completed and then line them up with contractors to do the work, and also provide funding, especially, for our small forest landowners, to provide assistance to it. Right now, the program has largely been focused on Eastern Washington, Central and Eastern Washington, because those are the communities that are have been identified as having the highest risk for wildfire. And we had very limited resources before 1168. And we literally just launched that program in April of this year in Clallam County, Okanagan County, and Spokane County that have, in some cases, they have communities there that have higher wildfire risk than Paradise, California. And we all remember the tragedy there. We know that we're seeing increasing fires on the west side of the state, including in Clallam County, and that more homes are at risk than ever before. As we get this program up and going, our goal will be identifying those and first starting by helping getting funding to communities like yours to do community-wide wildfire planning. And in that, it's helping identify what are the risks and what are the resources needed to address the risks, how many homeowners are at risk. And then with that plan, we can bring more resources to your community. As to the area of aviation, we work with our local fire districts for sure and having those resources, and specifically also with airports in pre-positioning our air resources. We only have 11, but we pre-position them in those areas that are most likely to see fire. And then we will move them around throughout the year as the fire conditions are changing or certain areas are presenting themselves. Unfortunately, we've had too few air resources. So we've had roughly, been able to put about 3 of those air resources on the west side of the state, and the remaining 7 of them on the east side, just given how Eastern Washington has seen far more fires. We will be receiving 70 million biennium, this coming biennium. We will be purchasing 2 new aircraft. We will also be expanding our exclusive contract for air resources. And we are always working with our local airports to be able to have more resources. I see Bruce Beckett here. He knows the work we're doing with Moses Lake. And the goal that we have of actually having Moses Lake, that airport, be not just a hub for Washington State air resources, but actually a regional hub for the Alaska, BC, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Oregon, making Washington State the hub for wildfire aviation, but also an innovation technology center. And in doing that, we will then be more able to have the resources we need in the case of fire, but we will also be able to grow our local economy in, by bringing that investment and the technology innovation here.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is Bruce Beckett. I appreciate the comments.
Yeah. We're putting a federal request in, actually, hopefully in the next day or two, Bruce. And I know we look forward to keeping it working with you.
But you know, you opened up the door to me asking the question whether you, as you go through this process, there's a lot of little rural airports out on the Olympic Peninsula that might be able to play a role in that whole strategy as well.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And so we're open to helping. And I think one of the other things we need to be looking is how we partner more with our local fire districts too. One of the examples I have is out of Chelan where, they own the helicopter, but we lease it from them and we put our pilots in it. And so there's a great opportunity for sharing. I'm not saying that model applies to every community, but I think us thinking out of the box in that way that helps really create the resiliency in the local community of the resources they need and also the expertise and experience, and partnering with us as to how we can support in that in a shared partnership.
Okay, thank you. So it's 9:05. Jim, do you have a quick question? I know you've had your hand up.
Just to comment, thank you for being here, Commissioner, and it's your checkerboard landscape is so spot on to all this work. Is when the person there mentioned the parking lot, that's actually a piece of common school trust lands, and we're not getting very much revenue off that as a parking lot. And if it was a high rise, we also have a couple malls over in Emma.
Yep. And a business, and you also got a business center, right? We have so much opportunity, and I know I'm interrupting you in your question, but we're sitting on land that is in an urban area, not just Seattle, but in your communities that can meet not only generating more revenue for the beneficiaries if it's utilized, but also helping grow that local economy. Also helping providing housing as our communities are struggling to house affordably many people.
Yes, and also there's a vineyard. So those that are need communion wine or just wine in general, support that vineyard because that supports common schools.
Drink more wine.
Yes.
Help our kids. That's my philosophy.
So my comment is more on the cooperation, collaboration, partnership, and I'm speaking from the WASDA Trust Land Advisory Team, and a couple of important legislations. That partnership was instrumental in the broadband legislation that is ongoing and occurring. And then other one is the clawback that it occurred for schools on the state forest lands because we were not receiving those. Well, we'd receive them and then it was clawed back from us. And for the last 3 years, 83 school districts have been receiving those state forest revenue. Now it's not, a great amount. It depends on where the harvest occurred, but it speaks to the partnership that we have. And I, from WASD, I appreciate your staff and those conversations. And thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Well, with that, I think we need to call it a morning. Thank you so much, Commissioner Franz, for joining us. I think it was really enlightening and helpful. We've got some next steps and we'll follow up on those to help improve our local economy using DNR's assets. And again, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, everyone. And I do, as Rod knows and others, Jim, right now there's a lot going on in front of the board, a lot going on. I urge you to definitely be engaged in the trust land performance assessment and the opportunities there. Obviously the work as we implement the new language we put in there on 1168 and inventory. And then I urge you, we have a new person in our agency working on economic development specifically, and a great opportunity for you to be working with her, and opportunities where we can help in the larger community.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Be safe.